Welcome. Thank you so much for participating in the Black in School Virtual Town Hall. And I'm also very excited to have join us today Camilla Moore, an attorney based in Los Angeles who has really made such an impact in the state of California and beyond as the chair of the task force to develop and study reparations proposals for African Americans. So welcome, Chair Moore. It was such an honor for me to be able to testify before the California Reparations Task Force on March 3rd. And as you are coming to the culminating phases of your work with the task force, I just wonder if you might share your reflections and also where you are now in terms of the work of the California Reparations Task Force. Chair Moore.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. I'm fortunate. It's an honor and privilege to serve on this panel with the other esteemed panelists as well. As Dr. Fortune said, my name is Camilla Moore, and I am the chairperson of the First of the Nation California Reparations Task Force. We are a two-year legislative advisory body. We comprise of 9 members, of which were appointed by Governor Gavin Newsom, or the Speaker of the State Assembly, of the California State Legislature, or the Senate President Pro Tem. And so in this 2 years or so, the sunset, as Dr. Fortune said, very soon, July 1 of 2023, we will be presenting a final report to the California State Legislature, recommending a wide variety of different reparation proposals in full accordance with international law. So that means we will be recommending reparation proposals in the areas of compensation, restitution, rehabilitation, satisfaction, and guarantees of non-repetition. And over the course of the 2 years where we've been working, we have enlisted the expert testimony from individuals such as Dr. Fortune, subject matter experts on a variety of different areas that cross-reference with the different harms and atrocities against the African American community, starting, of course, with the transatlantic slave trade to more contemporary harms against the African American community. And so that's kind of a synopsis of who we are, what we've been doing, and what's happening to collaborate.
Such fascinating work. I had the privilege of testifying before the Reparations Task Force, connecting the dots on a proposal that we have been advocating for as a part of the Black in School Coalition, which is a coalition of 16 education and civil rights organizations that have come together to push the state of California to add the lowest performing subgroup of students to the school funding formula, which is called the local control funding formula. Right now, the state of California recognizes 3 categories of students as high need and therefore gives them extra funding. That's low-income students, foster youth, and English learners. The lowest performing subgroup of students that's not already funded is actually African American students. 70% of African American students don't read or write in the state of California, and 84% do not do mathematics in the state of California. So this is a race-neutral policy which points to the groups that are the lowest performing, and in this case, it's African Americans. Now, the interesting thing is that the Reparations Task Force report that was put out in draft form last year included a recommendation that was this exact policy, that at the time was being carried in a bill called AB 2774 that the Black in School Coalition was the sponsor of, and Dr. Akilah Weber was the author of. There has been much ado, Alexis, about the fact that this bill would benefit Black students even though it's a race-neutral bill. And a part of what's been talked about in California is the fact that the White House, through the White House initiative that you lead, is having a conversation about Black Americans without apology, and which has been something that has been a challenge for those in the education, apart from the Reparations Task Force, but for those in the Education Committee and even our governor, to have an unapologetic conversation about Black Americans. And let me just read again the title of the White House Initiative. White House Initiative on Advancing Educational Equity, Excellence, and Economic Opportunity for Black Americans. How is it that the White House can be so unapologetic about talking about Black Americans, Alexis?
I'm sorry for that delay, I was on mute. You know, we're just so grateful that they are, and that, quite frankly, that we have the opportunity, to be unapologetic in using our federal resources in service to Black students, Black children, Black families, and Black communities. By way of a bit of history about, our executive order, there are a series of White House initiatives housed in this administration. So as we've been discussing, and we'll talk more about today, there is a White House Black Initiative. There's also a Hispanic Initiative, initiatives that cover Asian Americans as well as Native Americans, and our historically Black colleges and universities. So there are concerted efforts to have these very targeted and specific conversations with communities, quite frankly, that need. I would also add that the White House Black Initiative actually is the newest and was created under President Barack Obama. And then under President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris, the initiative was expanded to encompass equity as well as economic opportunity, which is certainly in keeping and in line with the larger goals of this administration. But you know, Dr. Fortune, to your point, this is an administration that is apologetic about the needs and what we can do to support those needs of our Black students and families. One of the true hallmarks of this administration that's actually reflected in our executive order is the whole of government approach that is being taken with this administration. And so within the Black Initiative, we have what we call our interagency working. And so we are working with all of the agencies. We're having regular conversations, and we are working together on places where we can leverage and collaborate to ensure that we are delivering. And even more importantly, listening and gaining feedback from our Black students and families and communities. So it is something that we are very proud of. We're certainly proud of the expansion of the work, you know, from the leadership of this administration. And, you know, again, we are, you know, extremely excited to continue to be in partnership with groups like yourselves and others to make sure that we are taking full advantage of the opportunity that we have and, quite frankly, the resources that are available with this administration.
Alexis, staying with you for a moment, I saw that there was a recent convening that featured Education Secretary Cardona that had to do with the Black Initiative that the White House started under President Barack Obama and has continued and expanded under President Joe Biden. Tell us about how this initiative touches the U.S. Department of Education.
Thank you for asking that question. We're actually housed at the U.S. Department of Education. Originally, this office was dedicated solely to the educational excellence of African Americans. That was a part of the original name. And then as we discussed, the work has been expanded, but we do remain housed here at the U.S. Department of Education, but obviously work very closely with the White House and with all of our other agencies. You did reference an event that we recently had with the Secretary, and I hope you're referring to the February 1st event.
Yes.
And so we were very, very excited to be able to begin Black History Month, celebrating the Black educator and how the Black educator shows up as a part of this year's theme, which was around Black resistance. And so what was just historic, because it was a historic day, and that was Secretary Gail Cardona sat with all of the living National Teachers of the Year who are Black, of whom there are only 3 who are still alive. And he had them all here. The first gentleman who was the Black National Teacher of the Year
Mark, one of the things that has been a challenge to the conversation in California has been the suggestion that because legislative and now budget efforts that result in assistance going to black students, because they, even though they're race neutral and make no mention of the race of the students, it's about low academic performance and funding student groups that have this historic low academic performance. But because the beneficiaries of that, not based on their race, but based on academic performance, are black, there's been an assertion by the governor's office that it's a Prop 209 violation. And Proposition 209 was the initiative in California passed during the Wilson administration in the 1990s that put an end to affirmative action in California. But there's been an assertion that somehow because blacks might benefit from a policy that it violates Proposition 209. And even an argument made, Mark, that there's a violation of the Equal Protection Clause of the Constitution of the United States in the 14th Amendment, which is why I found it interesting that the White House itself, if there was an equal protection issue, you know, the White House itself was talking about black Americans, so why couldn't California? But what is your response to that legal argument that anything that benefits black students somehow is a constitutional violation?
I'm going to borrow a term from Alexis's boss, a very highbrow legal term. What is being put forward out of the governor's office is simply malarkey. First question, right from the beginning, why the governor's overreaching in this space. I have the honor and privilege of serving in the former administration of Governor Davis when the implementation of 209 was rolled out. People will remember, and some may not remember, it was so long ago. In 1996, it was passed. It took a couple of years to litigate. We lost the litigation. And so by 1998, 1999, it was time to implement it. I was a part of the Davis administration in Sacramento that was given the task of working to roll this thing out. What is post-209 California going to look like? And one thing that was very clear, as Earl Jim Marinsky, who was a part of that effort, now the current dean of my alma mater, UC Berkeley Law School, was a part. Chloe Hewitt was a part of that. What we wanted to make sure is just this sort of thing wouldn't happen. At some point in the future, someone would be waiting the document preemptively, which is what the governor's office is doing. I think it is amazing that the bill of Assemblymember Dr. Weber, 2774, did not have a dissenting vote in either house of the legislature. We all know how unusual that is. It was on its way to the governor's desk, and it was pulled back. Unfortunately, from a rightness perspective, which means the issue is ripe for litigation, for legal challenge, I wish it had gone on to the governor. And quite honestly, I wish the governor had the severity of the looks of African American people in the eye after he told that bill, because then we could have gone right into the courthouse and challenge. Unfortunately, where we are now is all of this is not yet teed up, if you will, for a legal challenge. We'll have to have, we'll talk more about this later, but we'll have to have an actual controversy, an actual piece of legislation that is vetoed in some way by the governor, either by his not signing it or by his actual veto. Going to the courts and challenge. I think you should do on your behalf, or give your lawyer to do on your behalf, this argument that the de facto benefit of the African American community is enough for that bill to be overturned. I think that is something that is preposterous. I think you guys will win on equal protection argument. I have more to say about that, but that's what's going on right now. I think it's absolutely ridiculous, the decision the governor's office is taking.
Chair Moore, Camille, I wonder how you have, on the reparations task force, navigated this space of California being so reticent to really talk about race in a straightforward way. I mean, your commission is about race. It's about the impact of slavery on African Americans who are Californians. But how have you know, our coalition was not originally called the Black in School Coalition, because we weren't advocating that Black students be added to the funding formula for schools because they're Black. We advocated for the lowest performing subgroup of students to be added, to be recognized as high-need students in the state of California. And those students happen to be Black. But once it became the case that it was like, don't say Black, of course we said Black. Black at school, right? But how have you had this conversation in California about reparations in a place that's so reticent to talk about race?
That's a great question. Also, I wanted to say I was once a White House intern for the Initiative on Educational Excellence for African Americans in 2013 under David John, so it's really cool. To see that it's expanded and expanding, it's great. So to answer your question more directly, yes. The task force has navigated conversations around race in terms of legality under the Proposition 209 and then also the 14th Amendment Equal Protection Clause. So we actually consulted with, in our past public hearing, people or legal experts like UC Berkeley Law School Dean Erwin Chemerinsky, who pretty much, gave a dispassionate expert testimony and said, my expert testimony is not based on any of my personal beliefs. My expert testimony is based on how do you craft an eligibility criteria that has the best chances of surviving the California Supreme Court. There's a challenge of the Proposition 209, and then also a U.S. Supreme Court if there's any equal protection claims that are brought. And so essentially, in his expert testimony, he advocated that the task force adopt a race-neutral eligibility criteria. So that being, if you are a descendant of slaves, his dispassionate expert testimony was that the U.S. Supreme Court could see that as not providing strict scrutiny since it's not race-based, it's race-neutral, and then it would, be considered under a rational basis criteria, the lowest level of judicial scrutiny under equal protection standards. And so, via a 5-4 decision, after we heard from expert testimony like UC Berkeley Law School Dean Erwin Chemerinsky, through a 5-4 decision, the task force voted to affirm so-called lineage-based eligibility criteria rather than a race-based criteria. Now, the task force is meeting again, including March 29th and March 30th. We have another meeting May 2nd. Then our final meeting is June 30th. Before we release our final report to the California State Legislature July 1. So we are in the middle of the development stage where we are discussing, debating, and starting to determine, what those final recommendations are. And so, although last March the task force voted to get a 5-4 decision to affirm the lineage criteria, we're still wrestling and grappling with what does that actually look like in real time in terms of policy crafting, and those are the public conversations that we've been having for the past couple of months, and we will continue to have at this upcoming task force group meeting in the next couple of weeks, then our final 2 meetings. This is still a very open conversation about how to kind of navigate what you said, I think, so greatly in the LA Times article, the idea of California being a Black state.
So it seems like it could be kind of tortured to take this dispassionate lineage approach. Like in my mind, I'm trying to work it out. So in my family, on my mother's side, was enslaved on the Bratton family plantation in South Carolina. So I'm trying to think, it's like, what does that mean? Do we say it's like, it's not because you were enslaved as a political class because you're Black, but what we're gonna do is trace you back to the Bratton family, so you prove that your great-great-grandmother was enslaved there. Is that the idea? It's like a the timeline or some type of what does Skip Gates do? Is it become about genealogy, Camilla?
I think in part, so for instance, one of the preliminary proposals from the California Reparations Task Force is the creation of this new state agency. So that was another point of contention in the task force in this proposed agency, there would be, for instance, genealogy, where, the idea is this burden of proof, so to speak, to show eligibility for reparations in the form of genealogy, shouldn't necessarily be on the individual, but should be on the state. And so just to conclude and to provide further clarity, when the task force decided via 5-4 decision to affirm lineage-based reparation as opposed to race-based reparation, we clarified or defined that you are eligible if you are a descendant of a free or enslaved Black person prior to 1900. So 1900 is the cutoff. So if you don't have that ancestry, you would then be eligible. And then yes, to your point, we actually also consulted people like Marilyn Van, who is the president of the Indian Cherokee Freedmen. A lot of people don't know there were Black people of African descent who weren't only enslaved by Europeans or white Americans in this country. There are at least five tribes, so-called civilized tribes, that also enslaved Black people. And their descendants are considered freedmen of those particular tribes, and they're still to this day advocates for tribal citizenship. And so we had one of the major leaders of the Cherokee Freedmen Association, Marilyn Van, provide expert testimony, the same panel that Dr. Martin Fortune attended. And under Dr. Marilyn Van's expertise, this is all completely new. This probably sounds very out there for some folks. But Dr. Marilyn Van actually advocated that in order for AB 3121, which is the California Reparations Task Force, to gain traction, in order for our recommendations to be viable, one could argue that Black Americans who did descend from slaves is not a race-based category or even an ethnic category, but it could be considered to be a political class, which, and if you argue that way, that it's a political class similar to Indians, a federally recognized tribe, Freedmen, a federally recognized tribe, then that would even mean, for instance, Proposition 209, or even, strict scrutiny standards and the 14th Amendment. So this is all like pretty, pioneering things, but this is based on the consultation of experts like Irvin Chigurinsky, and Dr. Marilyn Van, and folks like Dr. Fortune.
So, Mark, I want to come to you and ask you to explain in very simple terms that non-lawyers can understand what equal protection under the law is. And what is this notion that a policy that would benefit Black students would somehow be a violation of the Equal Protection Clause? Let's start out with, what is the Equal Protection Clause of the U.S. Constitution under the 14th Amendment?
I'll do better than paraphrase it. I'll read it. The 14th Amendment to the United States Constitution, Section 1, quote, "No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws," close quote. And I like the challenge you gave me to try to make this digestible. I think one of the things that I have enjoyed the most about my career is taking very complicated material and being able to translate it. I teach undergraduates by choice. Some of my colleagues not. But I taught all the way up to the doctoral level, and I love my undergrads at UC Merced because they want to know most simply as you did, what does that mean, equal protection clause? I love what our colleague Camilla Moore just said when she talked about the test that you apply when there's a challenge to the equal protection clause. You can go on what they call a sliding scale. At one end is the rational basis test, at the other end is the strict scrutiny test. Strict scrutiny basically challenges government if it's going to do something that potentially has a disproportionate impact on a certain class of people. The government has to show under strict scrutiny that there is very little else they can do to accomplish that goal. That's the whole process. This is important to us. We got to do it, and we got to do it this way. Rational basis, as it was outlined, is a much lighter standard. There are a plethora of ways to handle it. This is one of them. And under rational basis, you can go forward one of several different ways to accomplish the goal. The question here is, what's the goal? If the goal is to identify the least performing students and to fix that, it is ridiculous that someone would make the argument that because it affects the very people you're trying to help, you have to throw the whole thing out. Among people who support you, they are friends and allies. I'm going to call it out. I think it was too long to sit back and let something like this happen to our kids. This is future generations. And sadly, back when 209 passed, I knew it would have this effect. I quietly worked with the governor's office before 16 was brought forward, which was supposed to overturn the effects of 209. And I said, I'm not sure we need to rush into this. There's a whole lot of work we got to do. There's empirical data we have to show before we can convince Californians to repeal 209. People took another path, and unfortunately, we know the result. Went down horrifically, and 209 is still in place. So what you're talking about doing, Margaret, is so important, and we can't let anything get in the way. The legal challenges, there are red herrings that have been put out there relative to the equal protection clause. I don't believe that by identifying a group, you call them a subgroup of students who are the most in need, the fact that they are African American, first of all, is abhorrent. But the fact that you can't have a situation where the fix, where the cure is actually effective to help those in most need. I've been in government a long time. I don't know any theory that's gone forward like that, that anyone's been able to embrace during my time in government or beyond.
Alexis, one of the things that's happening in the political debate in California is, and this is very typical, we've seen this movie and we know how it ends. Black student data is trotted out as the reason why there needs to be change. Then policy is suggested, you look at the details and you say, oh, only 5% of black students are even affected by this. Typically, black students aren't actually affected by the policy that is made in their name, and that's what's happening right now with the proposal that Governor Newsom has called the equity multiplier, which was his answer to this bill, AB 2774. When he convinced the legislator who carried it to pull the bill, he said, I'll give you a January budget proposal and I'll take care of the kids that you intended to serve. But he switched the conversation to be about low-income schools as opposed to low-performing students. And he proposed $300 million to go to low-income schools, and only 5% of the money would actually end up serving black students. So out of the 300 million, blacks would get 16 million. Keep in mind, if the legislator's bill, AB 2774, had been signed into law, the amount of money that would have gone to black students on an ongoing basis is 533 million. So that's why the advocates are upset and saying, well, this is crumbs. But what I'm curious about with you, Alexis, given that you've got a national lens, are there other states that are leading in this work around improving black student achievement in a serious way? What have you learned?
Well, that's an excellent question, and, that is something that the team here is taking a look at. As you probably know, so much of, I think what we've been putting out has been in terms of the investments that this administration is making. You'll recall that, at the beginning of this administration, we were in the throes of this, once in a generation, Malcolm
So one of the things I heard as having come out of the convening that you had on February 1st was that Secretary Cardona in Connecticut has done some work around this achievement gap closing work specifically for African Americans back in his days as the Commissioner of Education in the state of Connecticut. What do you know about that?
Well, I know clearly, his background and, the way that, he's very intentional about engaging families and in those conversations to really come in and provide that, support, around students, so that we can begin and so that, they in, the state could, begin to see, the sort of positive outcomes that we knew that, that our students were capable of. I believe, as secretary, that he has certainly brought that same energy, and I think focused here as well in recognizing that our children need a variety of things. As you know, we are huge proponents of community schools. We have put forward historic funding behind that. But again, as I mentioned, earlier, participating and listening to conversations like this, having very intentional conversations with Black families, are critical to our work moving forward. Again, people talk a great deal about parent engagement, engaging our families, and that's critical. But as you know, and as this conversation continues to unfold, that our Black families and our Black students are having some different experiences, and they're having unique experiences, and that voice and that perspective, needs to be brought in, to what we're doing.
It's so interesting to think about the experience of the Black family because, it's not monolithic, but there tend to be themes that happen to African Americans in schools that happen across the country. I mean, one of the things that Ben Crump, Mark, is engaged in now deeply is in Florida with Governor DeSantis and the whole push in Florida against Black history and against AP classes that have to do with African American studies. And now here in California, as Black families are pushing to be acknowledged in the school funding formula, as Camilla Moore said, it's become the Don't Say Black state. I'm curious about some themes that you're seeing across the country in terms of the struggle of the Black family to be acknowledged in schools in a way that other groups are.
Well, I think that given some of our experiences in schools, that plays a great deal in terms of when it's, once you have a student of your own, how you're going to show up. Some of the things that we have seen, it's around certain families, certain parents, sort of having an ongoing invitation to be a part of, certain activities and committees. But, one thing, well, a few things, that we found in some of our conversations is around just having a safe place to be able to discuss very specific concerns. It's our kids who are going to school and have to look at racial epithets on bathrooms. These are our parents who are having their own workplace struggles and are trying to juggle that in addition to showing up at schools at times that may not be convenient for them. And so, there are also, different family dynamics and just making sure that our Black fathers are included in the conversation and respected as such. So, we are, again, we are having very intentional and focused and I would say safe conversations where our families can really dive in and talk about their experiences so that we can share that back and quite frankly, I think some improved strategies around engaging our Black families working.
Mark, I'm curious about this piece. There has been robust policy, and I think we can use it as a model for English learners. English learners were included in the local control funding formula, our state funding formula for public schools, as a high needs group. So schools that serve English learners get an additional over $6,000 more per student to serve that student's special needs. And there's a whole gestalt of policy about how English learners are to be treated in schools. If there's more than 20, you have to have a council of parents of English learners that advise the school on how to serve them. I'm the former chair of the California Commission on Teacher Credentialing, and there's a credentialing policy that says in order to earn a license to teach in the state of California, you have to know how to teach English learners. In every textbook that gets approved, there's an English learner development section of the textbook that must be there in order to even sell textbooks in the state of California. So there's been a lot of intentional focus, and there has been an impact. In California, we measure student performance according to something called the California School Dashboard. And English learners are at the state average on every indicator. Now, I'm not saying that it's great performance for anybody, but it's decidedly different than Black students who, as a group, are below the state average in mathematics, are higher than the state average on suspensions, are lower than the state average on graduation rates. So a part of Prop 209 says that you can't have preferential treatment based on national origin. And many of our students who are English learners, the reason they're English learners is because they're from a nation other than the United States. Why is there such acceptance, broad-scale acceptance, that we ought to help students who are learning English in a way that we don't have for African Americans? Is there something in the law that is driving that acceptability of that conversation, but not the conversation about Black students?
And I have such a long conservative administration together, your history in terms of where politics and policy come together, it's almost unparalleled in the state. So I know you were asking that question with the strategy in mind. Let me say this, I relooked at that. So what I've been doing, I've got three computer screens, so I hope you don't think that I'm texting folks off. I have to say this nowadays, right? I don't know if people see my eyes, so he's on his Insta. He's keeping his Insta up, right? I'm not going to mention TikTok right now. But I have these different computer screens up, and I will answer your question, but the short answer is no. But it's bigger than that. You said something earlier that I really want to focus on. You said low performing students versus low income students. That's very important. But boy, am I glad we have these two representatives of their respective entities with us. We have, of course, a high-ranking federal official, and we have a woman who's spearheading the effort for reparations. What better company could I be in on this issue? We know that even the highest income African Americans have families that still underperform relative to education. If we limit this to low income or anything else, English language learner, homeless, the other category is foster care, all worthy. But if we're trying to fix this, we got to keep the main thing the main thing. And the main thing is that Black folks are underperforming public education throughout this country, particularly in the state of California. And very few have risen up, have arisen honest with black. It is what it is. So now we're trying to do something, all of us collectively. And that strong person argument is being held in front of us, that it somehow violates the Equal Protection Clause of Proposition 209. It does not. And I just want to keep my suggestion to you, respectfully, is that as you move forward with this effort away from this panel, as you continue to fight, that you keep the main thing the main thing. This is a focus on the lowest performing students in our state, period. Whoever qualifies in that subcategory is welcome to be considered. You need ethnicity, nationality, gender, etc. If you are the lowest performer, come on in this tent. That's what we're talking about here, not low income and all these other categories. So that's what I say. No, there's nothing in 209 of the Constitution that speaks to what the students work. And you know that, but I would hope going forward that what we'll do is really stay focused on protecting and enhancing the rights of the lowest performing students in our state.
Let's follow Mark's lead in this, and I want to invite Camilla and Alexis to advise this coalition on how we order our steps in our advocacy on this issue. What advice would you give us, Camilla and Alexis?
I would say for the reparations task force, for folks to stay engaged. This is the task force, I think most important stage that we're in. The first year was the study phase, which was memorialized by the nearly 500-page intro report that Dr. Fortune noted that was released in June of last year. The document is incredibly comprehensive. It's the first government commission report on the harms and contributions of the African American community since the 1968 Kerner Commission. After the chapter on enslavement in the interim report, all of the 12 subsequent chapters of the task force characterized as badges and incidents of slavery that still linger on and negatively impact the African American community today. And one of those chapters, one of those badges and incidents of slavery we identify is on separate and unequal education. In each of the chapters, there is a section that clearly delineates the state of California's role in perpetuating not only slavery, but those subsequent badges and incidents of slavery. But in each of the chapters, there's also a national section that clearly delineates the federal government's role in perpetuating not only slavery, of course, but the lingering badges and incidents of slavery. So there is data in there that people can use as an educational and organizing tool, data that states, for instance, California is the sixth most segregated state in the country in terms of education, how our students trend in school discipline, and other, negative areas. And so, again, this is the most critical stage of the task force's proceeding. So this is a great opportunity for folks to attend the next 3 task force hearings. You can email your ideas to the task force anytime as well. And then stay tuned for that final report, which will have recommendations related to education from early education, pre-K, K-12, and then also even college and university. I know one of the premier proposals for pre-college tuition to state college and universities and slaves. They're going to be policies that are going to be particularly transformative and are going to need a critical base of supporters to push these recommendations through the California State Legislature and then ultimately governor's cabinet.
Thank you, and I wanted to go to Alexis with this question of how would you advise this Black in School coalition as we move forward in our advocacy for Black students? And then we're going to take a couple of questions from viewers. Alexis?
Honestly, what comes to mind is please use us. We're here for you. And we are having listening sessions. We are happy to follow up. And I think that Gila said it best, and that is to stay engaged. We are here in service to you and to our community. We are more than happy to make connections. There are a series of equity senior level provide very regular and in-depth updates in terms of resources that are available and sort of the nuts and bolts, captains and technical assistance sessions. But I think that just in terms of keeping it simple, please.
Well, I can't tell you how refreshing that is, to have a federal resource to keep this conversation going, because one of the things that we know in policy work, that talking about the work actually matters. It moves the work into the mainstream. And this notion that African American students should be as well served as others is something that seems to be taking root in California, at least among the press, who seems to be sympathetic with the point of view. There's something not right. If 70% of a particular group of students, in this case the African Americans, can't read or write in our public schools, like what's happening here, and why wouldn't we consider that to be a high need? We have some questions coming in from viewers. One is from the, go ahead, Mark.
One of the things that I hope people come away from this is really supporting the effort to replace the 277 forms. That for us as lawyers, there's a rightness that this has to be an actual controversy, this has to be an actual challenge for them. And the way for us to frame that is for there to be a piece of legislation. Best case scenario, it passes and the governor signs it. Worst case scenario is it passes and the governor vetoes it, but it doesn't pass. But in order for us to do what we would need to do from a litigation standpoint, I hope people will appreciate that we really need to see a replacement to AB 2774 quickly.
So here's a question coming from the Central Valley of California, and it says, Fresno Unified has a program specifically to support Black students. Why do you think this program is not being challenged as a 209 violation?
I can speak to that. I served as counsel to the Fresno Unified School District. Nobody's challenged it yet. I have the sense of maybe put that question forward my dear friends down there. I'm not putting anybody on blast. But part of this is until something is challenged, it can move forward. I mean, 209 is the reason why it took us a couple of years to talk about implementing. It took a couple of years for the legal challenges to go through before it finally stuck and we then had to do what we had to do. So I think one of the reasons why folks in Fresno are able to do something different from people in other jurisdictions, quite honestly, is at this point, no one is challenged. I'm not sure what the fate would be if they did. So we're happy to go on to the next question.
Well, and I don't want to tarry here long, but it's perplexing because what the administration, Gavin Newsom's administration, has said is that there's nothing that's prohibiting school districts from having a specific focus on Black students, which was news to me. Even though you have school districts, including LA Unified, including San Bernardino Public Schools, including Fresno, as we talked about, including the Fresno County Office of Education, who have these programs. And so, as is typical to the change process, the field is ahead of the state, right? And the field is normalizing this practice of saying, we see a need and we're going to serve it, and then sometimes the state follows. But it does seem strange for the administration to say, you can do it at the local level, but we can't do it at the state level. That seems to me to be inconsistent. We're going to open it up to questions from the audience, from our listeners who are viewing us on Facebook and on TikTok and on YouTube. If you've got a question, go ahead and put it in the chat. I'm just going to turn and look to the board to see the questions that are coming in. While people are thinking about their questions, I want to do a plug for the March for Black Student Equity. On April 11th, this issue of the Equity Multiplier, the Governor's Equity Multiplier, is going to be heard in the Senate Budget Committees. The Black in School Coalition has proposed an alternative that was recently covered in an article in EdSource, and I'm going to ask our technicians to go ahead and put the link in the chat to that article in EdSource with our alternative proposal. But this March for Black Student Equity is on April 11th on the west steps of the Capitol. We expect thousands to come and let their voices be heard as we march for Black student equity. As we bring our conversation to a close, I'd just like to give each of you an opportunity to give us your closing thoughts, and thank you so much for participating in this conversation. Alexis, why don't we start with you?
Thank you. My closing thoughts really are, I'm grateful to be able to be here and be in community with you. And, you know, again, I can feel the energy from what I see and just from what I'm feeling in virtual land, that this is a conversation that we will continue. And I look forward to being a part of that.
Thank you. Camilla, why don't you go next?
Yes, it was again an honor and a privilege to be a panelist here today. Looking forward to continuing the conversation. As I said, that is how policy change manifests and comes to fruition. I will say, again, stay engaged. I wanted to highlight a few more potential proposals in the areas of education coming out of California State Task Force. And if you think there should be any additions, other suggestions, again, this is the best time to go to our website, subscribe to our mailing list, and provide your feedback. Because under international law, it is the victim group in this particular context, African Americans, really dictates what repair shall look like to them. So in the area of education, we have two advisory committee members, Vice Chair Amos Brown and member Don Tamaki, who have worked together to propose some of these preliminary reparation proposals in the areas of education, which were, for instance, as Dr. Fortune said, increasing funding to schools through the local control funding formula to address racial disparities. Also, there were implementing systematic review of school discipline data, improving access to educational opportunities for incarcerated people, adopting mandatory curriculum for teachers, credentialing and training for school personnel and transfer teachers, employing proven strategies to recruit African American teachers, adopting a K-12 Black Studies curriculum, reducing racial disparities in the STEM fields for African American students, funding free tuition to California public colleges and universities, identifying and eliminating racial bias and discrimination in statewide K-12 proficiency assessments. So these are just some of the proposals coming out of the task force. And so again, thank you for the opportunity, and please go to our website for more information.
Thank you. Mark, your closing thoughts?
It's pretty simple for me. First, I want to thank you for inviting me to participate in the Fortune family. For those who don't know, is multi-generationally committed to the education of our kids. They've been soldiers in that fight. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the Honorable Rex Fortune, was a beacon for a lot of us in this journey. And Margaret is a byproduct of her parents, and I'm sure making you both very proud. Wow, Camilla and Alexis, I'm just so pleased that I met you both in this process. Brilliant. I got a lot of information. I was taking a lot of notes. The bottom line is, I remain, I would ask for anybody who's with us to remain unapologetically black. We know what the ancestors would have us do. We have this power, we have this influence. We can't let people who purport to be our friends get away with what we know being friends like. So I would suggest that we hold people accountable. I'm old enough now to not give a damn about the potential discussion with somebody who's getting hurt. Close enough to the end to know that I don't have so much time to fight on behalf of our kids. So I would implore the rest who join us today to continue that struggle. And again, thank you very much for having me.
You've been with us for the Black in School virtual town hall. with Alexis Holmes, the Executive Director of the White House Initiative on Advancing Educational Equity, Excellence, and Economic Opportunity for Black Americans. Mark Harris, Professor of Management and Business and Economics and Director of Pre-Law Studies at UC Merced and of counsel to the law firm of Ben Crump. And Camilla Moore, Chair of the California Reparations Task Force. I'm Margaret Fortune with the Black in School Coalition. Thanks for joining us. I've been in here with a live studio audience, so you're going to hear. Thank you, everybody.
We will be back. Stay tuned and check on my timeline for more information about Black in School.
He's our attorney, right?
Stay tuned to YouTube. I will be sharing more information about the work of the coalition, and blackinschool.org is where you want to go to find some of that information right now. Check back frequently. Bye-bye.
Take a health break, a restroom break, and we're going to come back to a conversation with Mark Harris about